First of all, thank you to Jonathan and to Ani for bringing me here. Thank you to Oklahoma University. Spent all of a day and a half here. It's been a beautiful day and a half. Of course, coming from Alabama, this really, strangely, feels very much like a sister institution. There are many really interesting kinds of similarities. Institutions that are really similarly obsessed with national merit students, with outstanding students. There's a sport that we both play that I probably shouldn't start to talk about. But everyone from Alabama said, "Are you going to Oklahoma?" Take your cell phone and see if you can get to watch a practice or two. We might be matching up at the end of the season. But, again, there's mutual respect. We played each other in that sport before at different times. There really is a similarity of the institutions. I think the other similarity that a lot of the rest of the country may not quite know yet, there is, let's face it, there is an academic snobbery, and there's certain institutions, principally in the Northeast and the West, that everyone thinks that's where talent has concentrated. And there's been a spreading out of talent, as exemplified by the people you've heard from tonight. Amazing talent and amazing work is being done all over the country, and it just takes time for the rest of the country to come to grips with that fact. But that's clearly the case in Norman as well. So I'm grateful to be here. Partly at the instigation of Jonathan's class last night, the just haphazard book ordering system. When Jonathan told me what books had been ordered, it turns out that the only book of mine that's here, I brought some too, but is 15 years old. So I thought, well, okay, then maybe I should look back at some of the older work as well and read a little bit of it. So I'm really going to start. And the other thing is, now with videos and sound recordings available, I thought it's going to be kind of dumb for me to get up here and do something that you just go on the computer and find. So I'm deliberately trying to take an approach through the work that's unique to this situation. So we'll see what happens. In conversation the last day or so, my grandmother has come up a good bit, so I thought I would read this older poem. Certain shirts. Certain shirts I won't throw out. 3 I designed in 1970 and had Grandma Fania make them. To say they were for another era is too delicate a way to say how stupid they look now. Large and loose, like the top half of something a priest might wear. One is beige with gold edges, another navy with yellow and orange braid at the cuffs. The third is burlap with black branches and red leaves cross-stitched into it. I actually had the gall to wear them, the blue one, fairly often. I could have said anything then, and probably did. I wouldn't wear those shirts now, but I wouldn't throw them out either. So I'm finding out this book in its font size, it's just right at the glasses margin. This is, I'll either have you hold my book for me and I'll read it, or this will do better. Again, I'm starting by looking at some older work. And a lot of these poems, some of these poems were written in the mid to late 70s, talking about a long time ago. As I started to look at some of the more recent material, I do see certain recurring obsessions, and so you'll probably hear some of that. This one called The Hang of Telling Time. I would not have been a poet in Homer's time. My memory is no good. Besides, I distrust what is memorizable, which is not to say I have placed my faith in books, though my grandfather told me ever and again, we are a people of the book. 3 summers ago, I took afternoon drives down Highway 1 south of Carmel. Every day for 2 months I saw them, 2 men in plain orange robes. They would take 3 steps, kneel, bow down, touch their foreheads to the ground. I saw in the paper where they were pilgrims, Buddhists, who'd made a vow to journey this way up the entire West Coast. They had already gone 400 miles. Too often what I forget about the Jews' 40 years wandering in the desert is that the Lord did sustain them. When I was 5, I saw a boy from up the block boost himself up over a fence, but his foot slipped and he tore open his stomach when he fell. My senior year in college, I sat once or twice with a Zen group, an hour, cross-legged in complete silence. I remember, other than the pain in my ankles, when the priest reached over to adjust the way I held my hands. 27 years after, on vacation, I drove by the same cyclone fence. The time in between is unthinkable. I feel my foot slip when I try to. From elementary school, most kids went on Tuesday afternoons to religious ed. The words they came back with, purgatory, sin, catechism, went right by me. Who stayed behind and read or got to go home early. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream, which is the first round a child learns to sing. When I was growing up, we had a dog whose testicles never descended. The vet advised against surgery. He was wrong and cut out a 3-pound tumor 6 months before the dog died. I remember the name of the boy who hit a softball over the fence and into the street, the faces of the 2 boys who chased me home and beat me up, and the moment when a very smart girl began to cry in front of the whole class because she couldn't get the hang of telling time. On a gray, humid day, I watch a few cars rumble by the window. I estimate how much they cost and make up lives for the drivers. It is a dream in texture only, the way the merrilies tumble by in the child's song, as if the stream weren't moving, as if you and I weren't going anywhere. That's probably been at least 10 years since I've read that poem. And this was the first book that I put together. Those of you who are younger or beginning writers, a word of encouragement. This is the first real collection of my poetry came out when I was 42 years old. So it ain't a sprint. You know, it's if you're 25 and the book hasn't happened, life isn't over. Just keep writing, and then eventually the circumstances of how that happens, it's just not up to you. So by the time I did this book, I started to ask myself, so what do I really want to do with the book? And this book is called Double Space and opens in 2 different directions. I've read from the more conventional first half where I was learning kind of relatively plain-spoken narrative and anecdotal work. And the back half begins a more experimental mode of writing, which is kind of where I've continued, and kind of procedural work, working out different ways of writing and demanding of myself that I invent different ways of writing. Which of these 2? The first branching out and finding a different way to write for me occurred in a series of poems called the Law Poems. And what I ended up doing is, as I told class last night, as a teacher, the thing I hated doing the most was grading papers. I really enjoyed teaching, loved talking to students, having conversations, and I would always really kind of procrastinate when it came to grading papers. And so I say, well, I can't do it in my office, I'll get interrupted. So I went to the library, and I thought I'd see people there. So I ended up going to hide out in the government documents room. And even so, I had that stack of papers, and I thought, well, maybe there's something interesting to read here before I start grading the papers. and there it was. There was my source material for the next couple of years. It was the Alabama Legal Code. And so I started reading the Alabama Legal Code, and it's just astonishing. And so I began to do a series of collage poems, and you'll hear they're fairly long, but every other section, I swear to God, is verbatim from the Alabama Legal Code. And hopefully what this moves past is mockery or humor, because I actually began to think quite seriously about the law and its passion or its passionate attempt to define and get things stated clearly. And it fails at every turn of the way. It's really a rather tragic endeavor. But anyway, let me read you one called Be So Determined. His ambition is someday to be Speaker of the Assembly, speaking of which, assembly is the issue, not for the peaceful purpose of speech or demonstration, but assembly of phrases or of phases or the different faces of fact and action, of these words wherein you and I are for now herein assembled in this house. 40-12-74, each person operating a circus shall pay the following license tax. Where the seating capacity of the circus is less than 2,000, $50. Where the seating capacity is 2,000 and less than 4,000, $100. Where the seating capacity is 4,000 or more, $200. And the license tax here and above provided shall include the license tax for a menagerie accompanying the circus. Why did the children in the story not attend school? Why was Sounder a good name for the dog? Why did the sheriff come for the boy's father? What happened to Sounder when the sheriff came? When did the mother do the laundry? What did the boy fear had happened to Sounder? What would you have done in the same situation? Where did the mother think Sounder had gone? Why would Sounder have gone there? The enemies were of another breed, hard-bitten Captain Manderson for one, a cruel officer with hatred for Jeff in his eyes and a dark secret on his soul. 13A-6-1 definitions. 2. Person. Such term, when referring to the victim of a criminal homicide, means a human being who had been born and was alive at the time of the homicidal act. Honk if you love A, Jesus, B, semiology, C, golden retrievers, D, nurses, E, noise. Which field of words, which field of words, rich field of words, this field of words. 30-4-3, the wearing apparel of the wife, however acquired, is her separate property. The old name was a circulating library, and the idea behind it of books as a lifeblood has some small currency to it now. They hide themselves in chemical messages. What does it mean to make good money? And the opposite is true as well. You can't make a sow's ear out of a silk purse. 30-1-3, the issue of any incestuous marriage, before the same is annulled, shall not be deemed illegitimate. The guidebook makes recommendations about places to stay, where to eat, sites of particular historic or aesthetic interest, and is in itself a place to visit. Pages of good views, to make some small order and not get vain about it, to make some new order, and know it is but a small domain, temporary as the impulse which sustains it, to make some small new order. That's a mighty tall order, stranger. You best be moving on, pilgrim. 13A-11-13A. A person commits the crime of abuse of a corpse if, except as otherwise authorized by law, he knowingly treats a human corpse in a way that would outrage ordinary family sensibilities. Islands, irrigations, do or die in the name of the Dewey Decimal System. Can you explain to me why she isn't better known? New headlines at the top of every hour, accused of pulling up 4 chairs beside the water table. The best way to keep up with what's happening, money, water, currency. It's a strange occurrence indeed, but not unknown in these here parts, mistaking the part for the whole. Paging Mr. Tom Elliott, will you please come to the white courtesy phone? Paging Mr. Tom Elliott, please pick up the white courtesy phone. No association is free, up in arms, legging it out, thumbing back east. 13A-11-12, desecration of venerated objects, commentary. With no clear decision on flag desecration statutes, the lower courts have gone both ways. The constitutionality seems to center on the court's interpretation of the conduct, that is, whether it is conduct per se or symbolic speech. It does not begin as imitation, but soon you are in its snare. Having learned a composite practice, you proceed to play it as your own composition, which is not to say that originality is what's called for. In fact, there's no dumber project possible in something as intimately shared as language, against which voice is a smokescreen, as if to find your own voice in some way solved anything. 40-1-1 definitions, 9, masculine gender. All words importing the masculine gender shall also apply to females. 10, present tense. All words importing the present tense shall also apply to the future. 14, incompetent veteran. Any veteran who has been rated totally and permanently disabled by reason of insanity by the Veterans Bureau and for whom a guardian has been appointed. We were alive then, and there was a war. So we are alive now, and there are other wars. The political, the historical, bits of hail falling among mostly rain. Hail, the ones that hit hard. As a good American, I am compelled to picture history as a tough guy, but nothing to be afraid of, nothing that can't be fought or bought off. Here, take a C note and go have fun, kid. Another unread book. So the next, you can see from the 3 of 10, and the publisher, Charles Alexander, is a native of Norman, Oklahoma, in fact, a really wonderful poet himself. On the cover is a painting that Robert Duncan's longtime partner Jess painted based on a Scientific American painting and experiment. So it seemed to me to fit this notion I had of kind of constructing ways of writing and proceeding with them. So I want to read you just a poem from Negation 8, which sounds like an early version of kind of sampling. It's just real jumpy. I negated a bunch of different things. No pronouns, that was one rule. So that kills a lot of stuff right there. And then basically the negation comes from Hegel's phenomenology of mind. I'm pulling out quotations that have to do with negativity or the void, and using the first letter in a downward direction to generate the spine of the text. So the one you're about to hear, if you read just the first letter in the downward direction, says, certain thinkers long ago took the void to be the principle of movement. Okay? And then reading in the horizontal direction, cannibal upon extraterrestrial report card, tantamount to accusation of insistence upon negation as the only. Tuned to the heuristic, howling when the folds fell open, irreducible to non-acknowledgement of certain forces, knowledge of such forces, ex machina, rusty sub. Long ago, optic lenses, nighttime glow. Ages, graves, olden times. Turns out to have been Oriental influence, original as fetish, festive, kinship expressed vertically, to detect an actual black hole had in the early thinkers long ago. Vertical as opposed to indirection, a turning away from, devolved upon. To be artistic and practical of the business world. Beyond what was earthen. Theoretical determination, harmony of ears, eyes. Passing of years, reductio ad advertisement. Island, nope, childproof, introductory, peopled by leaps of detection, emotional involvement, consumption, out, foe. Modernization in all things, ordnung, volunteers, existence perpetuated by a series of marital paradigms ends up not interested in total remote control. Pretty jumpy stuff. Another section here that I just wanted to dip into it's called H's Journal. And a kind of lifelong fascination for mine has been reading Henry David Thoreau's work, and especially reading the journal. Just an endless source of just great and intriguing writing. There's so many things about it. And one marvel, the journal is 2 million words long. He never even mentions writing. And yet his father was an inventor of a really important pencil, and he worked in a pencil factory. There are all sorts of really strange aspects. It's wonderfully anti-symbolic writing in a lot of ways is what it ultimately becomes. Well, and a lot of my training, academic training, is oriented around 19th century American literature, American Renaissance writers. And I began to really be intrigued with their way of writing sentences. So also I wanted, from readings in philosophy, I wanted to write something where I could put numbers down the side for it. And so I numbered the side. There are 10 sections of 40 sentences each. And one of the first critics to write it, Margie Perloff, wrote about this, and she said, oh, it's so wonderful the way he is able to imitate and fake quotations I didn't fake any quotations, actually, is the truth. If it has a quote around it, it's probably from Thoreau's journal. And I began to try to write sentences that wore those same clothes. So at any rate, this was about the time that Glenn would have been studying at Alabama. So I'll read you I'm not even going to read a whole chapter, because some of the sentences get kind of long, but we'll dip into a few sentences, 20 or 30 sentences. 281. It's not so much a matter, and I'll kind of do this if it's a quote. It's not so much a matter of representing silence, but of respecting and acknowledging that which is not writing and that which prevents or impedes writing. Skywater. Each entry performs a procedure by example, and so for the whole. Here today, January 13th, 1991, it makes some sense to pause and consider the implications of what seems like our imminent precipitation of a war with Iraq, to say that war looms. Indeed it does, many threads at once, as Russians murdered Lithuanians yesterday, and war continues in Somalia. And within our inequitable cities, handgun violence stutters on. And it is not Russia or South Africa that has the highest per capita percentage of its citizens in jail, but us. And it is time again for our makers of sophisticated weaponry to have a live chance to test and enhance the value of their products. And so thoughts of a looming war must be interwoven with a daily meditation on the intensity of violence and dissatisfaction, which already is our daily bread. Thoreau's a little more concise. The maggot in their heads is patriotism. And another quote. The bullet of your thought must have overcome its lateral and ricochet motion and fallen into its last and steady course before it reaches the ear of the hearer, else it may plow out again through the side of his head. How could she read this aloud? So loudly does it already call in its unnameable way, disorder being one side of the story, defiance in the harassed ways of a new faith being another. Deliver me from a city built on the site of a more ancient city, whose materials are ruins, whose gardens, cemeteries. When I wrote these pages, or the bulk of them, I lived alone in a study, a room removed from the rest of my family, in a house which my wife and I were slowly paying off in the Downs in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and earned my living by the ambiguous and indefinite labor of reading, writing, and conversing. My writing career has been a process of learning to write in ways I had not yet read before. Thus, time after time, I have immediately achieved an audience and in the process shed the prospects of one. To regret deeply is to live afresh. One technique or fundamental methodology which I am quite attracted to and which may bear some resemblance to a sustained composition by difference is a sustained resistance to a refinement of style. With thinking, we may be beside ourselves in a sane sense. How easily we accommodate ourselves to war, especially when waged at a distance, with our news releases carefully filtered, and is often the case when we drop bombs on people of dark or different skin tones. Though once a ground war starts, we may have to readjust, and of course we can, and learn to take in stride more immediate instances of casualty, some of which look remarkably like ourselves. Keep your distance, do not infringe on the interval between us, and I will pick up line and lay real terrestrial eggs for you and let you know by cackling when I have done it. A strategy of specific circumvention of a typical journalistic visual orientation, such erasure performed upon this site leaves other objects present for attention, this and these. The whole cut impressed me as if it were a cave with stalactites laid open to the light. This is the one story I can tell, and it is not one. From the repeated critical impulses to understand Thoreau by looking away from his own work, one would have to acknowledge that something about his writing barricades itself against investigation. One mystery of transmission. I'm J.B. Murray holding a small bottle of holy water before mystic script. Though I wrote it, I require this agency and must look through it to resolve my own scrawl. I am not thou, thou art not I. And one other sentence from Thoreau. Every sentence is the result of a long probation. So that was an intrigue with trying to learn to reside within the sentence as a unit of residency. Another belief I'm about to inflict on you is one that I don't practice or understand or perceive the boundary between so-called critical thinking and creative writing. I've always seen those as all part of one ball of wax. So from a good portion of the rest of the reading, I'm going to alternate some between critical prose from this collection of essays, Lyric and Spirit, and pieces of poetry. These dual focal points, lyric, lyricism, and musicality, even the beauty of sound, and spirit, or how to find new ways to write a poetry that engages spiritual experience without resorting to a tired or merely received rhetoric and formulation, have been abiding preoccupations of mine in poetry and critical prose. Perhaps that is one of the defining oddities of my approach to reading and writing. To experience poetry and critical prose as part of a single, ongoing process of thinking and exploring. By simple, I mean literally a statement in fewer words, a kind of simplification that is spiritual, ethical, and mathematical in nature. Zhukovsky's laboratory of the short line fuses the lessons of his father and of Einstein. Of the former, Zhukovsky said, "Had he asked me to say Kaddish, I believe I would have said it for him. How fathom his will, who had taught himself to be simple?" And the lines that immediately follow make the link to Einstein. "Everything should be as simple as it can be," says Einstein, "but not simpler." A series of brief poems from the next series of pieces that I worked on were a series of poems called Days. And again, the invented form is simply a 10-line form, hopefully a high level of musicality, a lot of jazz inflection. And I'll read just a short series of these. Quick zigzag attack, blue-black inkjet on stock white pond. Thelonious all alone, hit hard the offbeat, white space, dark, rectangular pitch, arm or tar, which Chuck called it a clip joint. Chili Davis legged out the grounder. And then again, back in at witness, serendipitous atoms drip and cripple. The imperceptible ache of it, Jack, she took her life. A parent's love called the darkening of the heart. Emily to Susan, avalanche or avenue. Attention, intention, a tension, a 10-line essay, essays, assails, assault upon poor words, sandbags, hold back, onrushing theme, divert storyline, Ron's twins, grown up, set form, dead set on setting free, BP, beep beep, is back. Diversions, divergence, divergence, all along, song, tang, tongue. Hello, technicians of approved emotions. A run of one-eyed dog paws back door. Who will do your bidding? Bob, tell our contestants in light of new Hubble data refigure the Big Bang what they've won. Why miles stuck the about between round and midnight? I nor monk will ever know. Blow, John, blow, gauze, gossamer, ghostly, go, blow, John, blow. Next, the entire poem consists of a quote from John Coltrane in an interview. We never talked about just what we were trying to do. If you asked me that question, I might say this today and tomorrow say something entirely different, because there are many things to do in music. The Bob of this next poem and one subsequent poem is Robert Creeley. Died a few years ago, somebody I learned just a great deal from and was a dear friend. Good God, Bob, you're the one, of course, who made lovable and why the fuck not in such a tight span. These twists of thinking, specific to an instant. We addicts of intensity, we see in the angel. She has the actual mouthpiece of the trumpet in her mouth, and we hear blast by blast until we are broken down. Slow to slogan, voracious to veracity, amen to mendacity, flesh to pleasure, legs to legendary, costly to apostle, mesh, to measure, and I wake up next to you. And this next poem will determine whether Oklahoma is in the west or the south. Fabric echoes fabrication. You're making that up. And Country Boy Eddie says, I never etymology I didn't like. The local, not dirt, but deep down in the bowels of the earth. I don't get that poem in New York. Beginning over and over, Adamic American impulse, insidious erasure, nationally tragic habit, countermeasure, make audible the rhyme of mall and auction block, and so on. Book is this odd book, poems, Elegies and Vacations. A strange photo by friend photographer Wayne Sides. And again, in honor of the class that Jonathan is teaching, I'll read a couple of, I hope obviously Buddhist inflected poems. First is a poem for John Cage. And again, if you see it on the page, this will be fairly obvious, I think, but then maybe hearing it will be as well. The poem duplicates itself forwards and backwards. You'll hear literally the same words in the same order, just in reverse. We don't go to find you there. You made it, and you are not there. In its making, you were not its destination. As the canceled space, in your exact nature, you are there. You are there. In your exact nature, as the canceled space. We're not its destination, you in its making, and you are not there. You made it. To find you there, we don't go. And the concluding poem of this book is Sunyata Sonata, dedicated to a friend of ours, Norman Fisher, a Buddhist priest and poet. And actually, and this will happen again later in the reading, the real fun is at the end. So if you're in doer, we've got some interesting things to do together. But this will begin our process of collaboration in a more formal way. The first, as you can see from the book, the first and third sections of this poem that don't have any words. But they do have musical direction. Largo, breathing attentively, is section 1, and section 3 is Largo vivace, breathing attentively. So I think, and I'm going to make an assumption, and somebody raise your hand if I'm wrong on this. I'm going to assume that we are all here and we're all breathing. Okay. So that's what we're going to do. We have to do. You know, bro. Oh, yeah, come on. Somebody check out Ani's head. So we'll do a little breathing together for 2 of the sections. But actually, this poem, I didn't really value this poem that much, but I had a dear friend of mine, Sylvia Elliott, you may have known, who died of cancer a few years ago rather suddenly. And she would invite me into her freshman composition classes. And she would always confess to me, said, I don't really like poetry, but we're friends. I'd like you to come here. So, but do the breathing poem. So I really began to kind of think about this poem. So we'll read Sunyata Sonata, and I'll give you the instructions, and we'll do sections 1 and 3 together. Sunyata Sonata 1, Largo, breathing attentively. Two, no ideas, but in things. That things are not ideas, but in things are ideas, and aren't ideas things. Where in things are ideas? 3, largo vivace, breathing attentively. So once again, together for a bit. 4, in which things are ideas? In which ideas are things? No things, but in ideas. No things, but in ideas. The angels are engines driving on, driving on. And in them are ideas, but in things, no ideas. No ideas, no things. 5, if God stands outside of death, what can that know of us? Star, pollen, seed, sky. I feel bad that you haven't put this book down a minute ago, so I'll read from it. Of course, spirit is a topic that should produce squeamishness. In poetry, it is one of many areas that have been compromised by contaminated, habit-ridden rhetoric, like personal expression or an ego-based lyricism or linear personal narrative. Spirit has become a too easily learned craft. In the case of spirit, the commodification via advertising and pop culture is all too apparent, whether under the rubric of New Age or the more blatantly commodified forms of inner world self-improvement programs and retreats. But in each of these areas, an avant-garde or innovative poetry might indeed be throwing out the baby with the bathwater if these topics and concerns are altogether avoided simply because of the obviousness of a contaminated rhetoric. So I'll read you a few sections from The New Spirit, which is a book that some Jonathan students were expected to read. And I'll read you a short section, a longer section, and a short section. Seeing if there's anything that, this first one, I don't think there's anything that needs explanation. 6. In this world, whose ear, Susie? Oh, when the saints, I want to be their plumb crazy core, roadside desert, to desire, wander in that number. Yes, money first. You can tell that's what young want, and see us as quaint or liars if we say otherwise, gone down mid sudden mysteries. Soul upon water, soul in air, soul goes thinking, scribe sky, soonest mended, shut eyes embrace shining after image, verb without complication, that state of being. Air bubbles rise to surface and burst as we are lived. Bell tolls, each quarter hour arrives, departs, reaches the surface, against that face, bursts, bell toll absorbed within recurring sky. Go there, gather as you hear, given circuits in many languages urge prayer, whisper, petition, rise into light, forever ever moved, dance by daily steps to an altar in that number, 7 times 7 years, arrive at daily gratitude, wake into light, be there, in that number, love that morning, soul upon waters. Longer poem is called Teshuvah, Heading South. Teshuvah is a Hebrew word that means a turn or a return. There's a couple of poets mentioned here, Ronald Johnson, Zukofsky. Again, Ronald Johnson's just an amazing poet from Kansas, really. His big book, Ark, is really something to take a look at. A couple of Johns are mentioned in here. Coltrane, who's always present in this work. But the other person being talked to is also got John Taggart, who also is someone fond, a very fine poet and fond of Coltrane's writing. That should do it for this longer one. This or that, or some such thing, Chuck, when talking about a person's capabilities, called it wherewithal. Toward the middle, train played just ahead of any sense he already understood. Bless departed Ronald Johnson, who wrote anemone mnemonic to the least loomed am. But for absolute bond density, none better than Zhukovsky. Though Ronald could sure as hell slow you down. At, taps, aft, twilight, lilac, panicle. Rafter, beam, arch, colonnade, a cupola, Fran and Ollie show what's all the hoopla, chant a rant against the useful dance, thinking of living. Of most instances of a few minutes, honestly, you'd have to say, what plot? When the saints came final things, or better yet, to very best, could be consideration will be given, could be we won't wait in line. After all, they are marching in. Could be the doors, could be the hallway, could be the governor will unfold his arms and step aside. If flowers say it best, what exactly is it that flowers say? Lord always then of being. Homecoming starts with laughs. Star, spire, fly forth into seven elements, fled then into unraveled latitudes, loose to lucid, covered of summer syllables, foment a cooling firmament, bright hooves break along, furnished according to, reveals his glory early in the morning. We are much older than this would suggest, so it might here become itself, and here and there of adequate complexity, singing as the sign, singing as design, a sign the singing to our being here and there. My uncle tells me that neurophysiology research now shows that in order to see, the eye must move constantly, must make tiny movements so that the receptors are not oversaturated by a single image. We came across frozen archipelagos. Crossed Wolf River, ran along a road of words, listened in the forward movement of John's blue train. Distances time in miles, minutes. Crossed Hobolachito Creek, linguistic visitant, beloved decadent protectorate, and crossed it again, and then the Pearl River. Tend the flowers, changed by season. John, the stuttered phrase accumulated, layered phrasing piling on the seed words, rose, memory, problem, chapel, crying, vibration, led on by music in the middle of my life necessity. Finite times to return to this room that measures years, to this room, home of light, loom, permitted to return, finite as in count your blessings, for each one count this one, having found that compact concatenation, percussive sister. A constrained white boy's chant, but damn John, it swings anyway. Soul swings to its own dissatisfactions. That, the soul's genetic map. Hitched rhythm, that, and a whole lot more, the risk, of course, being flatness. Even with as much as gets forgotten, what is unforgettable, much worth knowing or trying to know. Be sure to know, or try to, what love is and where it exists as a force apart from specific persons. Better yet, whatever it is, have it sing words on the page, its bodily choreography. The children get older, which means your function grows increasingly retrospective or prospective, and insistent in ways that for others, your vision has no context. You chose a set of odd nutrients, and now you're precisely where they've gotten you when the saints in that number. No specific door or the best words of others. These readings then, teshuvah, no other purpose but the turning 7 times 7 years, the first time through all 7 cycles, then begin again with gratitude and growing stress on retrospect. Speak it and sing it when these have been forbidden. Speak it and sing it. Resources begin again when the senses. As before, the seed phrase must be adequate to words and permutations. That death, not expected. Crossed Wolf River, ran along a road of words. Listened in the forward movement of John's blue train. Distance is time. and miles, minutes, crossed Hobolochito Creek, linguistic visitant, beloved decadent protectorate, and crossed it again, and then the Pearl River. And I apologize in advance, there's a little singing in the next one. You hear some basic words from classic Hebrew prayers thrown in this one. Three little words, teshuvah, turn toward, you no more dramatic than this, car moving in and out of shadows. I love you and I have chosen wrong. Live with it. Three little words, when the saints, when something great, bags and train, in that number, turn and turn, felt a sharp turn at 49. Son at C-Lab cut the squid open, found the ink sac. Slowly we learned to work alone and with each other. Three little words, Baruch atah Adonai, love what is and where you are. Take dictation or quit altogether. Use your pays connection fee. Drove south thinking about this or that lush southern sound. Gateway, I'm here. Shema Yisrael Adonai, three words sweet. Hero Israel versus nervous bebop, soul attentive to its own amusements. Play it loud, Lord our God, through whatever horn. Breathe and shape, heavenly blue legacy, golden fall light drove me down the river delta, ghostly sax, tilted back, succession then, when the saints. Okay, we're getting closer to the present. Something that was mentioned earlier, what I've been reading to you from are objects called books of poetry. An odd thing is happening in the other room. You're going to sell books of poetry. Now, fiction writers, they lose track of their readers. Fiction writers, they sell like 100,000 copies of a book. Poetry, we have a whole different relationship to our readers. If you remember, like little children's toys, when you had a globe that would have these little little tiny bulbs that would light up. Poets don't tell you this very often, but we have that globe at home. And a little light goes off each time someone buys one of our books. You know exactly what that reader is. You go, oh my God, someone's reading The New Spirit in the Ukraine, far out. And then it glows a little more intensely than actually reading the book. So if you want to be part of this new global network, it's a little retro. All you need to do is you buy a book and you'll become family in a way. So what I've been doing, what I hope is starting to get clear to you, maybe not, is I'm working with invented modes of poetry rather than received modes. It takes a good while to pick a form that I want to try to live with and learn something about. And so next I'll read you a series of poems from the most recent book, Portions. Now Portions works with a very simple mathematical equation, 3 words per line, 3 lines per stanza, 6 stanzas, so 6 times 9, 54 words. In Jewish mystical lore, 18 is a magical number. Okay? Hebrew letters, pet and yud are word chai, means life. Started playing with the 18s. So I said, I'll write these for a while and see how long I can learn something from that form. Well, for those of you who are beginning into this writing world, the horrifying thing was I spent 6 years living with the form, exclusively with that form. And it was sort of like snowflakes or human beings, kind of an infinite variety within a relatively confined form. And after 6 years, I think I learned what everyone was capable of. I'll read you a few of these. The first, I started out, I've talked to some of you about this, I began in mathematics, drifted through pre-med, English. I'm now in touch with some people from my high school class of ages ago. They're shocked to find out that I went into English. It was obviously my worst subject all through high school, really obviously. And it's kind of funny that this twist came about. But I was in my second year in college, and an English teacher said, everyone in the class, you need to go to this poetry reading. And the 2 poets who read were Robert Duncan and Denise Levertov. before they're yes. So this pays not a bad start. So I think that had something to do with it. Oh, this is pretty cool. I might try to do some of that. He is bruised. We hold him dear as ornament. Given over to a music others manage to ignore, he is bruised, loyal to an invisible, almost comic, dare we say order. Compelled then, we may say, ordered light foot strides, first memorable instance of magic, chanting, bidding to abide with, to be among. You know, one of my fascinations is what we're doing to ourselves. Y'all hear that too? Dream. Might be for one of us. Dream we then of every step, the home our body made of interface, as we objectify ourselves bit by bit, reprogram, splice, heal, redirect, reconvene what we are, texture of tense, repaired. Dream we then, and sing of our new relations to time, milling ourselves to new specifications. Dream we then of every step. Study. Set upon stutter, summon, step up, cushion, cuss, percussive, squawk, aback, abash, block, bleak, block it, stop it. Step it up, let whatever over, ever, sever, severe, swerve, cut back, pinch, punch, push, perch, push toward, pleading, crash, pull, compel, clutch, serve, send, rescind, turn, face, return, study, technique, steady. Avant. Avant, I want, and if you, I am becoming my father's dying body. Okra, tomatoes, sweet corn, sunflower. To my son, our neighbor says, you look just like your father. Beans, field peas, new potatoes. Today's purchase, or to gain purchase, terror of bare relation. Just now being here, it of course slips away. Religion. The city didn't exist. Going to the country meant 10 minutes and cows. My father's father drove along, a happy man, if so, not in a contemporary American sense. He, with the given name Chaim, and his wife Fanya, drove slowly with a slight smile. They sang folk songs in Russian and in Yiddish. The cows were not far from town. The big city meant San Francisco on a slow highway with lots of stoplights. This would be a Sunday afternoon. In Hebrew, I'm told there is no word that means religion. For how or why extract that experience, that emotion, from the surroundings of everything else? Torah. Every day when I arise, I carry the Torah, bear it aloft for the torch that it is, carry it burning and unconsumed into the darkness of the day. Unable to find a temple, I keep alive the memory of the temple. Destroyed, the torch becomes the ash, the blossom of my father's bones. U for Robert Creeley. So the old cabin leans. Sit up, I said, as if to someone. I said it to you. I always do. If there were no one else, if there were only you, I would say, sit up and think someone heard. Such is my sense. The old cabin leans. What is never passes away. The good song, finally the good song in mind, thinking the good song, thinking and singing it through the good, the song, consequent, keeping it in mind, a vessel for carrying it, for bearing or igniting the good song, attuned to the hum of being, steady hum of fluorescence, the body's own good song. Breath, again for Norman Fisher. He's popular tonight. 2 poems in his honor. Breath. Red shirt, bright flash of color against fog sky. One breath at a time. Gratitude and attention. Determined wild salmon head up, rush homeward against silver cascading static of every other thought. For a moment, one breath. Let loose, it runs on anyway, your river of words. One breath, beginning to end. And the last book in portions, house. Pad, pod, site. Preparing a place, a launching pad, a landing site. Small birds, chickadees, finches, sparrows, ride out Arctic wind. Bobbing on suspended birdhouses hung from pine branches. Small words, as, on, and ever-moving sea. We live and breathe, riding upon this language house, a moving place that feeds and carries. Yeah. We pass those out. Now's the handout. Now's when your quiz comes. I didn't tell you those. I have something to pass out as well.
It won't be enough for everyone, so we'll have to space them out. They're 2 different.
One of these ones. Here's this one. There may be. This is a different handout. It's one that looks like this that we'll drink together. And so that one.
Space them out.
I'll do it. A couple of these to share. Yeah, you should. They're different. The handouts that Jonathan did, there are 2 different ones.
You have that one? Yeah. But this one, no.
Okay, so what the hell's going on? Let's see. Oh, man. I'll get to like
Way okay.
It's okay. We'll all share.
Okay, so after 6 years, and this is, we're really close to the present now. So if you've endured thus far, we're almost up to the present. After those 54-word poems, after 6 years of that, I was determined that whatever I invented to do next would have much greater flexibility to it. I would see writing in exactly that light. It was pretty bizarre. So the next thing I decided to do, and I ended up working with an animation artist and video artist. I've had the pleasure of working with jazz artists and film people and trying to combine poetry with other media. And I worked with this artist, Jane Ann Dill, who studied with Jules Engel, who's the animator for Fantasia, and was the first person Disney hired to start Cal Arts. And Jane Ann, we spent a year talking about Heidegger and then began our project. And so what I started to do is I've been writing notebooks now for a little over 5 years. Poets, I guess the kind of cliche for poetry as in other domains is the lower the stakes, the higher the infighting. And so poets will fight over just about anything and break up into small, even though they're
$5.
Right, kill for $5. Prizes, just absolutely stab people in the back, run over people at night with a car. But what I did find, there is actually one thing that unites poets. We love notebooks. There's a writer I know who doesn't collect or hang on to notebooks or a certain kind of paper, or ask, just if you're really bored one night and someone says they're a writer, say, what kind of pen do you use? And that'll also get the conversation going. But notebooks is a common denominator. So I too had been saving notebooks. And then the problem with the notebooks, of course, is you get notebooks and they're so nice you're afraid to write in them. What if I screw up? So I solved that problem. I just forgave myself in advance. And that helps a lot because you're going to screw up a lot. So what I ended up doing is starting to write. And my determination at the beginning was very simple. The form of the writing on every page would differ from the prior page. But actually, I'm a slow learner. And so it wasn't until the 7th notebook that I began to really work in what I now think of as shape writing. And now, I'm in the 20th and last notebook. And so this, I'll read to you some from the last notebook that I'm doing right now, which may end the project. We'll see. But every page, as you can see, the shape is radically different from the prior page. There's certain other rules. I never do a draft, so I'm not looking at something and then copying it into the book. And I just write it. The other thing is, I'm also, as you've heard in a lot of the other material I was doing, I'm almost always using some other source material. That was something I learned really early on. The first writing teacher I had said, you know what you do when you have writer's block? You know, you read. It's real simple. And then Neil Gaiman, the sci-fi fantasy super writer, somebody asked him about writer's block. He said, it's ridiculous. No. What the hell are you talking about? Does a plumber say, I've got plumber's block today, I'm really not able to work? I don't know where this comes from. So the advice to read was really helpful. So the first 10, I started on the notebook project, and I could give it a really modest title, The Notebooks of Being and Time. Okay. Pick some really modest subjects. And the metric, I've been reading Heidegger, and I thought, okay, I'm getting older, and as you get older, you realize your reading's finite. So you either reread or decide, what is it I want to read? Can't read everything. Not the hedonist reader anymore. So I decided, okay, I've never read Being in Time, I ought to read it. So that was a metric. I would write in notebooks as long as it took me to read Being in Time. It took me 2.5 years, and I do not recommend the book to you. It was not what it was on. One of the things I learned is that it was not that good. But then the next, I didn't want to abandon the project because I was just learning to write in shapes. And so I began reading his student, Emmanuel Levinas. And that also justified by the fact that H and L are my own initials. So I thought, okay, bracket it with 10 more notebooks and read Levinas. So this is the 20th notebook that we're up to now. And what I thought I would do is just read you a few sections, a few pages from the notebook to give you an idea. And again, you can read along with this one. I've written 4 goblets, so now these are actually being used for Passover in some services. Be the one who breathes still in the world of common speech, cup pressed to lips, a nourishing draught seen at a glance, a goblet for the eyes and ears, holding emptiness, the given breath, spirit of the said and the unsayable, from which stems all that is in being each and each and each, and a steadying base so that in time we may put it down to take our rest, in time to take it up again. I'm still learning a lot from the shape writing in that, as you see, just to read, you have a different relationship to the intimacy of the page. And you need to turn it in. We made it, the first section of it, the Cuban book that Ani mentioned, includes 9 pages.
The one you're supposed to send to me.
We'll
And
see.
I'll send you a check.
That's got some pages. And this is the 18th notebook. Paul Naylor, who did the New Spirit for Singing Horse Press, we're really having trouble with getting clear PDFs because there are 3 different colors of ink being used, and it's really hard to get clear images. So hopefully this will become a book. Then I'll read you a few pages from that, beginning with a distinctly Buddhist page, which is this one. Okay, this page that looks like this. Okay. If you stare at the wall, the same wall, every morning and practice your breathing, you will come to see how interesting and varied the wall is. In my case, simple sheetrock painted beige. You will see the changing angles, texture, and intensity of the seasonal light, the imperfections and shadowy tones of the wall itself. Perhaps you will orient yourself by means of a slightly upraised dot, barely visible. You might imagine to be the face of God, or you might discover that if you stare at a spot intently, it will disappear. Or you may learn that the wall itself is a great generative emptiness, a doorway made solid by praying and silent wailing. This one looks like this. The quotation's from the Tao Te Ching from Thomas Meyer's translation. Upper left it says, emerging green first day of spring. Across the middle of the page, be the stream of everything. And in the lower right it says, buy a better router. From an earlier one. And then again, in the course of these, they're really, I have a very juvenile sense of humor. It hasn't emerged as fully as it might. I mean, one of my favorite pages is a page a day keeps the doctor away. I didn't bring that one tonight, so I won't read it. This one's would be too embarrassing. So this one says, so that the simplest word may live here and change. This one says, a small window is all that you are given, a life of X years, this dimension. Don't be so cross with me. That was hard to translate into Spanish. This one. We will speak to each other, reporting what we think of our wandering, as written in the books, speaking to each other, listening so as to arrive at a few sustaining questions, these, the simple furnishings in the house of the voice. This one, a bow in the direction of Italo Calvino. If on a winter's day a reader, if years from now, or if suddenly now in a morning's clarifying light, if prologue or prelude to whatever love might come your way, if you and I are turning the page together, if verse itself is a version of turning and returning together, of hanging on through the tightest curves, if on a winter day, if this day riding together we arrive, if together we pause to take a reading, may we hear as given guide, as prelude, that ever word onward.